As you saw from my email, I'm super excited about this because people love to talk about customer interviews, but everyone's like, they're great, but not for us. So hopefully today, Nikki, you're going to be walking us through an awesome framework and process for doing that. In the meantime, while we wait for people to join, here's a couple of things that you might want to take note of. So when you're writing in chat, make sure that it says to all panelists and attendees, unless it's something you only want Sophia and I to see, then we're happy to do that. Other than that, there's a Q&A section. So sometimes chat gets a little crazy when people are talking to each other. So if you're worried we won't see your question, throw that into the Q&A and we will make sure to ask Nikki those questions at the end. Other than that, if you were on last week or you didn't make it to last week, all our workshops are being uploaded to the blog. So if you go into getuplift.co/blog, you will actually see last week's workshop with all the transcript and the recording and the worksheet that we gave out. And we're going to do the same with Nikki. Actually, Nikki has written this amazing blog post for us about customer interviews, and that's going to go up tomorrow live with the video that we're doing today, including the conversation about babies and kids and when they go to sleep, right? And how crazy the weather is. So that's all going to go live tomorrow, hopefully, unless there is any issue. And yeah, other than that, I think we've covered everything. Guys, if you've chosen to spend this hour with us today, I am so happy to have you. I do recommend putting your phone on silent, or what I do is I put it down, facing down, so that it doesn't, the pings and the dings and the dongs don't get in my way. And I would go and say, like, at least minimize your tabs and everything because it gets distracting. Take the time to learn because each one of these workshops is super actionable. And it's really built around frameworks. So my goal and our goal is to really make sure that you guys are getting as much as possible from it. So I think I've said enough. Nikki, I'm so happy to have you on for today because you are the resident customer interview expert. And I read your article and I loved it. And I love everything you say about customer interviews. And I think it's going to be really cool. So Nikki, if you don't know her, she is a conversion copywriter and she does a lot of customer interviews. She runs a course and she does some pretty kick-ass stuff. But I'm going to let you introduce yourself, Nikki. And then you will share your screen. I will go on mute and we'll just be monitoring the chat. And if you guys have any questions or anything, just let us know. So take it away.
Thank you for that intro. Yeah, I didn't actually prepare an intro if you watched the beginning pre-show. So yeah, I do conversion copywriting. I run a course, and Handel just chatted that she's one of my students, and she's awesome too. So yeah, customer interviews are very scary when you're first starting, but then once you actually do them, they are really fun because you get to like dig into the way people think, which is just really fun. Like if you're in CRO and if you're in copywriting, then or if you're running a business to, you're interested in the way people think. So it does end up getting fun once you get over that hurdle of, oh my, I'm talking to complete strangers and asking them to like spill their life story for me. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. All right, you can see it? Awesome. Okay, so how to set up and run customer interviews to increase conversion. Okay, so if you saw the email that Talia sent out, she said that if you don't run customer interviews, you are throwing money down the drain. Now, why is that? If this is your first time at Get Uplift, then you should know that Talia is an optimization wizard. And that is because she focuses primarily on emotion and how that impacts conversions. So less on things like best practices, like color or form style, or things that aren't linked to a real strategy, and more things that are data informed and human driven. So there's that balance of making sure that things are informed by the data, but that they're really driven by the way people think and act and what they want. So when you look at CRO strategically, you can mostly boil improvements down to two main things, and that's messaging and like the resulting hierarchy, and copy. Now, the thing with messaging is if you need to find out what matters to your customers, where are you going to look? You're going to look at your old customers who went through the same pains, the same emotions, the same objections that your prospects are going through now. There are all sorts of ways to mine from messages to look at what your customer experienced. And these workshops, these weekly workshops that Talia is doing, are going to help walk you through all those ways. But my favorite way is customer interviews because they're so amazingly deep and rich. You just can't compare a conversation to a one-sided monologue, especially if it's a typed monologue that's happening while your customer is checking Facebook or making dinner or petting her cat. So if you need to find out what to lead with, what objections to shoot down, all that good messaging stuff, customer interviews are totally crucial. Now, with copy, obviously I'm a little biased as a conversion copywriter, but it's for a good reason. Check out this quote from a CRO at Google. He said, "I passionately believe that content," and he means copy, "is the most important part of CRO." So he's a pretty high up there guy, and copy is really a big driver of conversion rate optimization. Now, good copywriters don't write their own copy. This is like a big secret. Basically, because when you want to write copy that converts, you don't want to write it yourself. You want to continue the conversation that's going in your prospect's head already. You want to write the copy based completely on voice of customer data. Voice of customer data is all that good stuff that you get from customer interviews. When you talk the way your customer talks, when you use their language, you don't need to hard sell. You're just there supporting their decision to choose your product. You're just gently nudging them down the path. There's no really need to push. You're not talking to them. They're talking to themselves, just framed in your context. If you want to see this in real life, Groove HQ doubled their conversions after they ran customer interviews. So you could see the before and the after. In the before on the left, they just talk about what they do, and then they even do technically have a voice of customer. And then on the left, on the right, you see this much more personal, colloquial kind of statement that sounds a lot more like something that's actually going on in your head. So you could think that the testimonial is voice of customer data, but it's not what's going on in your head. You're being talked to. You're not thinking it yourself. And that real voice of customer data in the after, what's actually going on in their customers' heads, that inside the brain language, that's what made them double their sales or their signups or whatever it was. All that said, customer interviews are very hard. There's a lot of technical setup. They're really nerve-wracking to run. The data is super overwhelming to organize. And there's also the time investment. To go through all the steps takes about 4 weeks. By the way, you can rush it and do like 2.5 weeks, or if you're working with a team. So you could hustle it down to 2, but it typically takes about 4 weeks. But customer interviews can solve for so many things. And the data also has a shelf life for about a year at least. So that's how you grow in business. You do hard, uncomfortable things. So they're hard, but they're an investment that will totally pay off. So let's set some goals. The best way to run a round of customer interviews is to set a goal first. Your goal will dictate who you talk to, what you ask them, and it can even dictate what kind of incentive you'll consider. How are you going to find that one goal, especially given the fact that you want to learn so many things? I swiped this from Talia's amazing goal setting method. It's a recent addition to my customer interview process. And it is this document called the 4 helpful lists. And you can see that it has 4 columns with 4 questions. What's right? What's wrong? What's missing? What's confusing? And what's really important here is that you sit down with your team and you just fill in everything you can possibly think of that fits into these categories. Just everything. Put everything and anything. Don't think about sounding stupid. Don't think of it being overwhelming. Just get everything into this chart. Then you take your results and you filter out what's really important and land on 1, maybe 2 questions. Once you have your overarching goal question to solve for, you can figure out what you're actually asking your customers. And this is where we get into developing your question line. So let's say you came up with this goal of your trial users are not upgrading and you want to solve that problem. You want to figure out why your trial users are not upgrading. So you'd ask questions like, what was the tipping point that compelled you to sign up? What problem was our solution solving for you? Did you try any other softwares to solve this problem? Did you read any of the how-to emails we sent? How many times did you try out the software? And of course, these questions are just surface questions. You can keep digging into them. And when you have a goal to solve for, you'll see where you can dig and where it doesn't make sense to not dig, to like avoid digging. Also, based on that goal, you'll learn the different personas that you should be speaking with. So with that previous example of the trial users not upgrading, you would want to talk to the people that are upgrading and the people that are not upgrading. Those 2 personas will inform and you'll be able to contrast, and it will be really interesting to see why some people are, some people aren't. Those are good personas to talk to. Does that make sense? You guys see how having a goal streamlines your interview process? I can't actually see chat because I'm in presenting mode. 1 second. Chatty. All right, somebody let me know.
We can hear you and we can see stuff. I'm gonna.
And it makes sense?
Yes, of course it makes sense. Totally.
Cool.
See, Joan says it totally makes sense.
Awesome.
And Stephen. And Lindsay.
And Lindsay.
Everyone agrees.
Awesome.
Guys, let us know in the chat how many of you have ever conducted customer interviews, just out of interest, and I will let you know the results as we move on, Nikki.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so the first thing you need to do in your setup is invite your customers. And here is my favorite way to do that, and it's also something that I swiped from Talia, and that is to send out a survey. Why do I love choosing interviews from a survey? For a whole bunch of reasons. And the first thing is that you get to pre-vet your participants. You read through your responses, and the people who give you like really robust answers, who tell you things that are really intriguing or who include a lot of emotion, those are awesome people to interview. So basically, I love sending out a survey first because I'm a control freak and I get to control who I talk to. So here's an example. I ran this survey for a rehab facility, and we asked, what would you, if you could change anything, what would you change? And this guy said that he does not love getting vulnerable in the group and one-to-one sessions. And that is really intriguing. I'm like so triggered to talk to this person. There are so many questions around this answer. Like, did he hate getting vulnerable but saw it as a necessary evil? Did he not feel like getting vulnerable would help him recover? Maybe it was that the therapists weren't encouraging and he didn't feel safe to get vulnerable. There's so much unanswered here, which means that he's a really valuable person to talk to. Another great thing about sending out a survey is that you are more likely to get yeses from people who filled out your survey because they already took the time to fill out the survey. They're interested in communicating with you. Chances are they probably love you or hate you. And those 2 use cases, those kinds of customers that love you and hate you, those are people with really awesome data. And the last thing is that you get quantitative data to sift through too. And this is really awesome because you don't need to dig deep. Oh, actually, that's not what I'm supposed to say now. It's really important to validate with interviewees, like what they share with you, to validate it and make sure it's accurate. So each interview that you run is only one person's potentially unique experience. And that's the risk with qualitative data. You want to make sure that other people are experiencing the same thing. So you're running the interview to get the deeper, bigger picture, but you do need to validate and make sure that you're not shifting your messaging based on what one person felt. You need to back it up with qualitative data. And now the one more thing was that you get to skip your surface questions. So not every question that you have is something that you need to like dig into an interview with. You could just get those easier questions out of the way with the survey and then dig into the more deeper kind of questions with an interview. Now I want to give you an example of this message, like not to base your messaging on one person's interview. So I did message finding for this really cool street side pub in an open air market. And the owner is this crazy foodie, and they do everything from scratch. They make the beers, they make the bitters, they make the sausages, everything is from scratch. And I was trying to define who their ideal customer was, and I kept hitting on hipster because they take their food so seriously, like it's got to be a hipster place, right? But then I got this gem from a customer. And he said, Hatched is like watching a baseball game, but without the baseball. And baseball is like really not hipster. So I realized that it wasn't about the food, it was about the experience. Now, it would have been really crazy to base a messaging shift on what one customer, even though he was a great customer, what he said. So I had to validate all that. And I went into their Facebook reviews and I saw all this stuff. And there's just like so much talk about the vibe of the place and the great service and how fun it is. And I saw that it wasn't just his unique experience. It was really something that was across the board. People were coming back. They were coming in for the food, but they were coming back because of the experience. Okay. Now you need to start recruiting people for your interviews. So your basic recruitment steps are, first, send out that survey. And if you missed last week's workshop on how to write a great survey, then you should totally catch the replay because it was awesome. And you should follow everything Talia teaches because she's awesome. So you want to run through your database and filter according to the personas that you established beforehand. So using that previous example, the users who upgraded and the users who didn't upgrade, and then you send them surveys. And at the end of the survey, you ask if you can follow up with them, if they're okay with your following up. Then you run through the results and you sort them according to the people that agreed to follow up. And then you run through them again and see who has the most intriguing responses, and you invite those people. But before you send those invitations, you need to figure out how you're running the interviews. You want to find a good video conference software. I don't know if I should say that Zoom is a good video conference software anymore.
So maybe no. I'm going to say no.
Maybe it's Uber Conference because that face-to-face interaction is really great for conversational direction, and nonverbal body language also gives you tons of extra information. You also need to make sure that you can record the calls, and this is for two reasons. First of all, you want the exact wording. That's the valuable voice of customer data we were talking about before. It's really hard to catch what people say exactly in real time. So recording takes care of that problem. It's also very distracting when you're taking notes. It's distracting for you, and it's also distracting for the interviewee. You want this to feel like a conversation, and you also need to be fully present, and you need to drive the direction of the call. So if you're distracted with note-taking, that's not going to happen. Okay. Next, you need to make it really easy for users to book an interview slot with them. There's a lot of friction with them booking a half an hour plus of their time, so you need to make it really easy for them. So when you use a scheduler like Book Like a Boss or Calendly, that automatically schedule, like they can see your availability. It automatically schedules the meeting links. You don't have to do a whole bunch of back and forth with them, but that's the way to go. So you want to be speaking to 7 to 20 people. Less than 7 won't get you enough data to see themes and trends, and more than 20 will just be really overwhelming. And you'll be getting a lot of repetition that's just not valuable enough to justify all the time and the overwhelm with running so many interviews. Also, don't book more than 3 a day. unless you space them out, like beginning of day, end of day, because you just won't come to the call with the right energy, and you'll also start blurring accounts together and getting confused, and it won't be good. You also want to make sure that you are inviting more people than you actually need, because the drop-off rate is very high. And you want to make sure that you're talking to them for at least 35 minutes, because you need time to get comfortable. They need time to get comfortable. You don't want to be rushing the clock to spit the questions out. You want to run it like a conversation. And the last thing with your interviewee, that's not supposed to be there, is that you want to give clarity on your goals. You want to make it really clear that you aren't just asking their opinion, that it's not a support call. Most people have never participated in a messaging interview, and they're probably just expecting that it's more like a support interview, that they get to just vent about your product or rave about your product, and that's not what you're aiming for. So in my invitation, I like to include a few questions that I'll ask in an interview, just to give them a good picture going in of what to expect. Okay, incentives. This is going to be a little radical. I want you to consider not offering an incentive. Little psychology 101. When you try to motivate people with an external thing, like when you try to get a kid to clean the room for a piece of candy, or you try to get an interviewee on an interview with an incentive, it's just so much less effective than playing to an internal motivation, like the kid feeling good about their clean room, or the customer feeling like they just helped a company that they love. If you have a really loyal customer base, hold off and try to tap into the internal motivation instead. And by the way, I've read a lot about not offering incentives because people might agree just to get that incentive. And I actually don't think this is a reason to not give an incentive, because I actually like talking to those people. I find them really interesting. Like, why aren't they interested in my product? Why is a gift card more exciting to them? I love digging into the people, like into the customers that haven't bought into the narrative. I find that it just like uncovers really cool things. So what I do is that I hint to an incentive beforehand and then send something small afterwards. People love surprises, and you are actually thankful for their time, so you should be rewarding them. But honestly, you need to test it with your audience, but don't just default to offering an incentive. See how they respond without one, and then if they need one, you push forward to one. Okay. Now, one last note before you actually start the call. You should create a script of questions like we talked about before after you develop your goal. But I don't want you to hold onto your questions like a security blanket. It's scary at first, it takes practice, but you should be veering off your script if your conversation takes an interesting turn or if you uncover something really unique. Just keep your goalposts in mind when you do go off script and make sure you're still keeping in line with what you want to accomplish. So I know that's kind of like, how do you do that? So let's use that example of that rehab facility. Let's say I wanted to talk to this guy. And let's say the goal of the interview is to solve for low completion rates. So a lot of patients are entering the facility, but then they're leaving early before they complete the course of treatment. So that's my goal. I'm trying to solve for low completion rates, and I decide to talk to this guy. And let's say he tells me that it's hard for him to get vulnerable because he's on the autistic spectrum and emotion is just a hard thing for him. It doesn't resonate and he's just not good at it. So if a large percentage of our customers were on the spectrum, then this would be good to dig into. But if they're not, then this really just isn't important in the context. Now, let's say he said that the therapists weren't helpful or that he didn't feel safe. That's something that will actually probably affect most of the customers. So that would be something that fits under that goal and should be dug into. Make sense? Cool. Okay. So now it's time to make your interviewees and yourself comfortable. So this is a little Nikki hack. It's a technique that I really love doing. You send a little video, just a little intro, hi, so that they get a mental picture of you. And it just breaks down some of the hesitation, some of the barriers. They feel less nervous. You're less of a stranger. It just makes things a little more comfortable. And there's tons of software that you could do this with. You can use Loom, you could use Bonjoro, you could use Soapbox. Okay, a couple things when you're running the call to make sure that you're getting really authentic answers. So the first thing is that you want to zip your lips. It's so easy to talk over people. And especially if you're digging into a pain, there will be a lot of silences and hesitations to continue, a lot of rooting around for words. And you should totally allow that. You want to feel that struggle and you want that authentic voice. So it's very uncomfortable allowing silences and not jumping in to make people like to finish their thoughts and to make them feel more comfortable when they're struggling. But when you let it happen, you get really authentic, beautiful answers. So number one is silence. Number two is a few no-nos. The first one is why. I learned this from Hannah Shamji, who is also a conversion copywriter, but she is also a counselor. So she's coming at this from a therapy perspective. And she says that why is a no-no in therapy or anytime you're trying to get vulnerability or sharing. Because why implies that there's one answer. So you start thinking logically instead of working through the emotion of what compelled the decision. And you're also immediately on the defensive. It's like you have to justify yourself. So instead, if you turn your whys into whats, you get much better answers. You still get that emotional answer. And I actually find this really fun, turning whys into whats. It's kind of a little bit of a challenge. So instead of saying like, why did you sign up, which makes them feel like they have to get a right answer, you explore what happened. You say, what was the tipping point that compelled you to sign up? The next thing is speculation. Don't do speculation. A lot of companies will ask questions like, if we added feature X, would you sign up? And the problem with this is that I might think I know based on my present situation what I will do in the future, but things will be different in the future. I can't know for sure what I'll decide in a different case that I'm in right now. We're just not good enough at speculation. Interviews are gathering data. It's qualitative data, but it's still data. You don't want fluff that people just make up. And no one has any idea what will impact a decision in the future. Next piece, and this is a do, not a don't. You want to get them in the moment. So there's a super cool method called context reinstatement. And if you're like any sane human and you love CSI and secretly wish you could be a forensics professional, then you get to role play that job for a little bit, because context reinstatement is what investigators do when they are trying to get answers from their witnesses. So basically, instead of asking these high-level, big-picture questions, you get them in the moment. So their memory is triggered, so they feel the emotion that was going on when they witnessed the crime. And in the case of customer interviews, they feel the emotion that led them to act or not act. Your interviewees are dying to provide a logical reason that makes them look good. So what you need to do is kind of circumvent that logical side and sneak under to the emotion. So you want to ask questions like, where were you? Were you with someone? What were you wearing? What was the weather like? You want to get them in that moment first, and then you can dig into the real motivations and objections that they might have been experiencing. Gotta take a drink. The last thing is that you want to be curious. And this is what's going to lead you through the call. This is what's going to help you veer off script, allowing yourself to explore as long as you're keeping those goals in mind. Okay, time to organize everything. The first step is to transcribe your video. Again, you're not taking notes, so this is a very important step. I like to use rev.com. It's the cheapest high quality option. But Temi is also a great cheap alternative. It's not great because it's not human transcription, so it does make a lot of errors. So if I use Temi, I will only use it if I have a really high quality audio. People are talking clearly, there's no accents. And I will also have someone run through the transcription against the video first to make sure that it's accurate and word for word. Because again, you want that word for word. It's really important. And then you organize all the data. Now, so many copywriters and companies will run customer interviews and get all this like beautiful, robust, amazing data, and then they'll solve one problem. when it can solve for so many, and it lasts for such a long time too. And the reason that they waste all this data is largely because it's not organized in a way that's accessible. It's just too hard to find solutions. So here is my system for organizing all the data so that you could come back to it again and again. I'm going to walk you through it. And Sophia will send out the link at the end of this so you can get access to this worksheet too.
Right. She just did that in chat. So there you go.
Cool. Okay, can you guys see the worksheet?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so when you first come in, you will see this, which means you should make a copy of it. And then this is actually a step you want to do before you run your interviews. You want to open this up and you want to go to this tab called Core Questions Persona 1. And you want to rename it with whatever persona you chose. So we were doing upgraded trial users. So those are the trial users who did upgrade, and you want to put in your goal questions. What were those like big goal questions that you were asking in the beginning? And we have the questions, why did they sign up? Why are they sticking around? Then you want to go to the next persona, rename that tab, and say non-upgraded trial users. And then put in your questions as well. So why did they sign up and why didn't they upgrade? Then each time you run an interview, after the interview, you want to make a new tab for each customer. So let's say Sam Adams. And then you want to fill in, oops, I'm sorry, I'm all the way down. Okay. And then you want to fill in right after the interview is over, you want to fill in your initial impressions over here. So what's intriguing you most right now? Well, these two things are intriguing me. He saw a conversion list when they switched to us. He's super happy with support. Then you want to fill in what's in sync with what you expected. So these are all things that just are like top of mind right away, your like immediate impressions after you ran your survey. You just want to fill this all in. And then when you get the actual worksheet, you can kind of see a little bit more of what's going on, like what kind of things you would be filling in. So that this initial section right over here, this is all just like top of mind stuff. Give yourself a buffer in between interviews so you can fill this out immediately after running your interview. Then after you get the transcript and you can like run through it with a highlighter and see the word for word again, that's when you want to fill out the rest of the sheet. So you go into information gleaned and you fill in your questions over here of like what kind of things you found. And you want to fill out the answer, like of, let's say, how did he find us? You want to fill out like how you found him, how he found you, but then also put in the quote so that you have this like rich voice of customer data totally accessible. So for example, if you wanted to then go and write a page about referrals or, you know, word of mouth or something or whatever, you could find this really easily and maybe say something along the lines of guys and recommend it and use that kind of language. So you fill all this in and then you move on to the next section. So you can see over here, there's, whoopsie, I skipped these. You are putting in like each topic and then putting in the quote that prove to you the topic. Then you want to go into themes and you want to look for interesting use cases, sticky messaging, heightened emotion, and repeated instances. So you just fill that in, what kind of things you like found out from your interview. And then the last thing to fill out is your action items. So was there anything that you need to do after you ran your interview? So like in this case, you want to follow up for a case study, you want to sign him up for an affiliate program. And he also said something about an abandoned cart feature that he didn't like. So you want to add that to your update list. And finally, you want to add some tags so that when you are trying to remember this guy that said something about abandoned cart, you don't have to read through this whole sheet again. You could just go up to the tags and see, oh, okay, this was this guy. Okay, awesome. Now we could like go find it instead of going through everything all over again. After you run all your interviews, you take this section, the themes, and you put it into your master list. So right now we only have like one interview filled out, but you would put everything all in here. So you just have one master list of all your sticky messaging, interesting use cases, all the like really important stuff is all here in the master list. And then you go back to your core questions and you answer them based on what you have in the master list. And that's how you organize your data so that you can go back to it again. And does anyone have any questions? Let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, there were quite a few questions coming in. So first of all, to answer our first question, who has run interviews? So we've had quite a few people say they've actually run interviews, and some people were saying that they have conducted interviews for their clients. Some were saying they've done that, but they felt more amateur-like and not really successful with those, or knowing how to use the data that they got from all these interviews. And we got a few interesting questions. So Marie wants to know, what's an example of a good small incentive that you could give people? And this is actually something that we spoke about last week with customer surveys, that many companies are really frightened that people won't agree to answer their surveys or jump on a call with them. So they offer an incentive, and it does kind of sway the answers in a certain way. So yeah, Marie's asking, what's an example of a good small incentive?
Good question. So I'm not sure if you mean like an incentive to send at the end, like a little reward kind of thing that I was talking about, or an incentive in the beginning. But either way, I think some of them will be similar. If you are a SaaS, then it's awesome because you could give something that doesn't cost you anything, like an extra month of the software use. You know, anytime you can do something that doesn't cost you anything, but is valuable to the customer, that's always really cool. You know, if let's say you have a product that's a digital product, you know, you could just send that out that doesn't cost you anything. Another cool thing for incentives is to send like something that's complimentary. So let's say, I don't know, they bought a set of knives from you, you know, to send like a little cutting board with a logo on it or something like that. And then there's always gift cards. Those are easy. So yeah, those are some small incentives you could send.
Yeah, I think what I like to do is, as you mentioned before, is maybe hint that we'll be really grateful at the end, and then just say towards the end of the interview, thank you so much for your time. Here's, you know, a voucher for coffee, or here's a gift certificate for Amazon, or here's, you know, you're going to get 30 days free of using the product, or whatever it is, which is a better way in my books than saying to someone, you know, here's, you know, if you answer our survey or answer our customer interviews, then we will give you this and this. So that's kind of my experience. And if you are going to offer an incentive up front, as you said, I would keep it really small. I had a client recently say they wanted to offer an iPad to people that would answer the survey, not the surveys, the interviews. And I was like, no, please don't, because we'll be getting just spam upon spam. So yeah, I would stay away from incentives. That's kind of my 2 cents on that. Okay, we have William, and he's saying he's going through this process right now with a client, and a thought. There's a desire to allow surveys to be anonymous, optionally. But how can you respect that and still be sure you'll know who to interview later? So we talked about the fact that it's a good practice to start with surveys and then choose the interesting answers and invite them to a customer interview. So how do you still kind of give people the option to be anonymous, and yet give them the option to then follow up with them and interview them?
That's a good question. I actually find the opposite, that surveys are already kind of anonymous because it's just text on a screen. Whereas like getting people who want to be anonymous for an interview, that's more of a struggle because they're actually meeting you and they have to, hi, I'm me and you're seeing me and I'm going to get vulnerable with you. So That's just in my experience. But you can always, I mean, with a survey, give the opportunity for them to stay anonymous. And then if they're willing to share with you, which you'll always get a few people that are okay being vulnerable and sharing, even if it's something private, there are always going to be those people. And you can also put some clauses around it, like, your data will stay totally anonymous. The recording, I'm not going to, send it out to anyone. I'll delete it as soon as I get the transcription, all this kind of stuff that can help them feel a little more safe with sharing. Does that answer your question?
Well, you should let us know in chat if that answers your question. Awesome. So I guess my question for you, Nikki, and maybe Sophia has questions too. She might go on to us, and come off mute at some point and ask, and join the conversation. My question to you is, what do you think is the biggest, or I'll say the best way to get over that hurdle where, and I get this from clients a lot. So I actually have a client right now that I'm having this issue with. This is actually with surveys, that they're so worried about sending out surveys to their customers because they send them emails all the time, or they've already done like an NPS, or they've already done stuff. Like, how do you tackle this thing you get from your clients? And maybe if you guys are working in-house even, or it's your own business and you're thinking, I want to do this, but I'm so worried that people will get annoyed or they'll think we're spamming them. So what's your best approach to getting over that and actually reaching out to people?
Interesting. So I did branding for a while. I come from a branding background. And so I'm kind of coming at it from that, in terms of like the fact that your customers love you and they want to be associated with you, and they often want to talk to you and they want to hear from you, as long as you're not annoying or, have a faulty product that they, don't like. And then even then they might want to talk to you just to like rant at you. So, if you just have that mindset shift of, we are helping them and they want to help me, I think that could be a really big shift. And there's also so much data about how, you can't email your clients too much, your customers too much, as long as you're providing value, all this kind of stuff. And even if you're not providing value, if you're helping yourself, if you're in that context of value, I really think it's just a mindset shift of knowing that you are providing value and that people like you and they want to be helping you.
No, I agree. And I think it's also about communicating that, as you say, to the client and saying, we value you so much, and everything that you're saying and everything that you're doing with our product or whatever, or service, that we really would love to hear your thoughts so that we can make it even better for you. And as I was saying to my client, literally yesterday, I was saying this to them, that they were saying, wow, we're getting like people saying that we're spamming them. You're always, like, if you have a very big crowd, you're always going to get the naysayers. There's always going to be someone who's going to say, oh, you're spamming me, or stop, or whatever. But you'll be surprised how many people are happy to contribute and jump on that call and, answer your survey and stuff like that. So
I just did.
I did. Like, do you have something to say?
I have a question.
Yes.
Before you ask your question, I don't want to mess up the whole off mute thing. I just did a customer interview yesterday, and she said to me at the end, she said, I feel so much pride being a part of this company because I see how much you invest in developing your messaging and helping more people. So she wasn't saying you're helping me. She was saying, I really respect the fact that you're trying to help more people and get more customers. I respect your thought process and how thoughtful you are in doing this. So even beyond just helping you as a customer, people just respect when companies have integrity, when they care about customer acquisition, all this kind of stuff. So that was just a thought. Sophia, what's your question?
That's an awesome thought, and it's so true as well. Well, my question was more from your perspective as a copywriter. Like, how do you recover from a bad interview? Because I find that when you, like, sometimes, like, you have all your questions prepped and the customer looks awesome and everything looks great and the interview just goes, like, badly. So what's your go-to for that?
What do you mean by badly? Just so we can all get context, like not getting interesting answers, or what's a bad interview?
Yeah, like you ask the questions, but they start going off on tangents. You try to bring them back, but they keep going off on tangents, like no matter what you do. Like, what do you do then? Or is that just me? Like, it could just be me.
No, it's not just you. Actually, Claire Sewell-Intrup has a really cool idea for this kind of thing. I mean, it's not, whatever, it's not cool. It's just very effective. I wouldn't even continue that call. I would just say, like, you know, thanks so much for your time. This has been really helpful. I got everything I needed. And then just end the call. Because it's not worth your time or their time if they just aren't giving you any information that's useful. But I feel like there are other bad interviews also, like when they're trying to answer the question, but they're just like not, you know, kind of not yes or no answers, but like dead ends kind of things. So I think you just have to realize that some people are not going to be useful. Or that, and this is where that like don't do more than 3 in a day comes in, and that you have to be curious and you have to engage in like a conversation, and then things will happen. And when you just keep like asking questions and like not exploring, then they're just going to answer the questions instead of exploring alongside with you.
Yeah, I agree. That's also my go-to, is kind of just wrapping up that call and moving on. And trying to go back to the reason I invited this person for the interview. If it's because of a survey, then I'll go back to their answers. And what I usually do is, before I jump on an interview, I'll review the answers again that they made in the survey. And then to try and bring them back before I jump off the call, I'll say, you mentioned this, or you said this. Can you elaborate, or can you give me, and can you explain how you came to feel this way or think this way, to kind of grab them back into that situation, and kind of bring them into that. Again, this is if you did the customer surveys first and then reached out to them. For me, that's the best way, because many companies, when I work with them, they say, we'll choose the people that we'll interview. So we'll choose like our favorite customers and we'll reach out to them. And for me, that's actually not the best practice. I like to do surveys to everyone, to get the people who are, and that's a question that H. Schwartz, that's what you're calling yourself, H, said, this will cover the lovers and the haters, but how about getting to the ones more on the fence? And that, to me, is how I do it. I do it with customer surveys. I will reach out to as many people as possible so that I get that whole story, and not just like, oh, these are the best people. I really want to get the whole thing, and then it's easier to reach out to the right people and get them to participate in interviews. We've got a few more questions coming in. So first of all, Carl says that he'll defend incentives, having used them in big user research projects. Incentives are a decent idea if you need to recruit people quickly and are having trouble with people not showing up. You also don't want just fanboys or girls who will give their time for free because it skews the data. It's an established market research practice, but I absolutely agree about keeping incentives small. A token gesture, you need to screen to avoid getting people who are just doing it for the incentive. So Joan says, my big problem is I have my questions, but I don't know how to explore deeper. I find it hard to listen to their answers and then go deeper. I find it hard to listen and think about their answers at the same time. Is that just me? No. Does having a goal first help with this? I never had a goal before and think that may be the key. Nicole, what do you think? Nicole, I've got so many names for you today. I'm sorry. Nicole, here's your name, Nicole. Nicole, what do you think? Sorry.
Woo, I like it. I think that's actually an advantage. that you're focused on listening, and it's hard to think of how you should follow up. And that's where like that silence thing will play in really well. When you don't have something to say, you're often like, I know that it's like, oh my gosh, I have to think of something to say. But when you just let it sink in and think about it, and then, explore it from like a realm of curiosity and interesting, what do I actually think about this versus like, what should I be asking next? Then you're coming at it from a place of like really getting to that more vulnerable, deeper sharing, where you let the interesting things sit. And when you let the other person also let their answer sit, oftentimes they'll just keep filling it in. Like when you're silent, they'll keep filling in the space and tell you more and more. Or you'll get like a really deep, good question because you're thinking about it. You're not just, like, oh, I need an answer. I need to ask another question. Okay, what should I ask? You're letting it flow from what's interesting and what's curious.
Yeah, I agree. And I think having a goal is definitely key to getting started, and not setting up too many questions to start with. So if you have 4 or 5 key questions even that you're going to ask, with that goal in mind, I think it's easier to dig deeper. And as Nikki's saying, or Nicole, whatever you want to call it, just sitting there and letting it happen. One of the things that you do with user testing, and we're not talking about this today, but in user testing, what you do is someone will say something and they'll say, it's really difficult. And then it's called mirroring. So instead of asking a follow-up question, you'd say difficult, and then just stay there and let them elaborate and say the next thing. Just because you're like, oh, difficult. They could interpret that in so many ways. So that's kind of my technique, which I do with user testing and with interviews. Okay, we have 2 more questions coming in. Montreal says, hey guys, great tutorial. My question is, are you contacting the most recent customers to interview? And if not, how far back do you go?
I think that's going to depend on your goal. I wouldn't necessarily reach out to customers that bought like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, unless you have a reason to, unless there's something that changed in your product and you kind of want to like dig into, the people before the change. But yeah, I definitely think that you need to know why you're reaching certain time frames of customers. Does that make sense?
Let us know in
chat.
Yeah, yes, cool. Awesome. Similar to you, depending on my goal, I will decide, but as I said before, I like to have the difference in opinion and not just go for specific people. Lindsay is asking, what do you think of in-person focus groups versus individual calls?
That's an interesting question. I haven't done a lot of research on focus groups, and I've never run one. But I think there is actually, I did do a little bit of research on focus groups. And I think it's interesting in that it might be biased towards playing off other people's responses. What one person says might trigger something else. And I think that could be cool to do both, but I would be nervous about basing things on what people are saying in the presence of other people, because again, you're digging into like the pains that people experienced before they bought your product, and they might not want to share that when there are a lot of people listening. Or they, there's more of that drive to like make themselves look good. So I think it could probably uncover some really cool things. When you have more of a collaborative kind of environment, you do get more interesting angles. So it would be cool to run both, but I would definitely still want to do customer interviews to make sure you're getting that like vulnerable sharing.
Agreed. Sophia, do you have anything to add? We've got 2 more questions here before we finish today's workshop.
I had another question.
Okay. So wait, let me just ask Greg's question. And Greg wants to know shelf life of your data. So 12 months, question mark, best way to validate that limit for the client. Whoops, I kicked something.
That's a good question. I would think it depends on like if things are changing, if the customers are changing, if the world is changing, if their product is changing. That's really like 12 months is kind of the time frame you want to put on all your data, because things just kind of change that way. But I really do think that they can last longer. I think that they can last until you know that things change, or you think that things change. But I know they're good for 12 months. That's why I put 12 months. So it's hard to know how you could validate for each client. I think it would depend. But you would want to be looking at their marketplace and their target audience and all these kinds of things and seeing, like, does it make sense that what someone said a year ago is the same thing that they would say now?
Yeah. How many big changes have you actually made? Anna says, I clicked the link and signed up on Nikki's page, but did not get any email.
Oh no.
The worksheet is exactly what I need right now. So Nikki will, when we're off with this goal, she will check. I'm sure it's just a timing thing. But if you don't get it, then you can always let us know on the blog post that we'll post tomorrow with all this video plus everything. Clint says he didn't get the email either. And
I tested it.
Oh, that's okay. It might be a time thing. Or don't worry, Nikki will get off the call and she will fix this for you guys. And if you still don't have it by tomorrow, then reach out to us and we will make sure to get that over to you, okay? All right, so I think we've answered everyone's questions.
Sophia had another one.
Sorry, oh right, Sophia had a question. Quick question, because we have like
quick question. I know, okay, speed asking. When you set a goal, so it goes really handy for giving you an idea of what you want to get out of the interviews, but how do you avoid asking leading questions that help you reach that goal? Like, are there any mindset things that you do beforehand just to make sure you don't do that? Or, because I find it very easy to like just try to guide them towards my goal.
Yeah. And that's something that I struggle with too. It's like, stop leading. Yeah, I think like because you set that goal and you set that script, you can make sure like you run through the questions beforehand and be like, is this leading? Is that leading? Is this leading? And when you go through that process before the call, then even when you're on the call, you have that mentality of like, don't lead. And similar to what, I don't remember who it was saying about, that they have to think before they ask another question. Like you can give yourself space and time to be like, that's really interesting. And then frame the question in your mind before saying it. Like, it's okay to not be this smooth interviewer. It's actually really good to just, let things sit and to give that time for silence and, to frame the questions right so that they come out right, and just, have patience for yourself.
I agree. Okay. Just to answer the last question, does this process also apply to luxury stores? 100%. It applies to everything. Okay, guys, we have 1 minute, so I'm going to say a few things. One, we will have the recording plus the outstanding blog post that Nikki wrote for us tomorrow live on the website with everything that you need, including the worksheets. Number two, next week, we're talking about competitor research, which is one of my favorite topics. So I do hope to see you here next week. Dave, it's so awesome to see you. I didn't know you were on the call today, so that's awesome. Dave is one of the Emotion Cell students, so that's nice of you to join. Guys, if you have any follow-up questions, anything, feel free to throw them in the comment section in our blog, and we will jump in and answer all of them there. Thank you so much for attending today. Stay awesome, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.